Hello everyone, welcome back to UGC Net English detailed lectures. In the previous class we discussed TSLH essay Hamlet and his problems. Today we are going to discuss one of the topics of all time importance in UGC Net, that is movement poetry. Movement poetry. Movement poetry during the 1950s. The movement was a term coined in 1954 by J.D. Scott. So remember, J.D. Scott coined the term the movement. So the movement poetry or movement poems formed as a reaction against the neo-romanticism of earlier British writers. So movement poetry emerged against neo-romantic poetry. So when J.D. Scott used the term movement poetry, he included writers Philip Larkin, Kingsley Amis, Donald Davy, D.J. Enright, John Wayne, Elizabeth Jennings, Tom Gunn, and Robert Conquest to this group. So remember the members of movement poetry. The movement was essentially English in character. So it was essentially an English type of movement or a trend, we can say. The poets from other parts of the United Kingdom were not included in the group. So writers from England only were included in the movement poetry group. And other writers from other parts like Scotland, Wales, etc. were not accepted to the group. Actually, the poets of the movement were not an organized group with any well-defined and deliberately formulated aims shared by them all. So they had not, started it as a group activity, but J.D. Scott could really find some similarities in their poems. So he used the term the movement in order to identify these poets as a group. The poetry of each member of this group differed in several ways from the poetry of every other member. The group's objective was to prove the importance of traditional English poetry over the American-led innovations of modernist poetry. So they were basically against the extreme modernist poems. For example, T.S. Eliot's poems. The poetry of the movement aims at a stark realism. It employs traditional syntax using ordinary diction, and it is most often colloquial in style. So these are the common characteristics shared by the movement poets. Stark realism, traditional syntax, ordinary diction. So we know that T.S. Eliot's diction, there would be hard, difficult. But here, the movement poets, their diction would be ordinary. And also they use colloquial style of writing poetry. Their poems were nostalgic and filled with rural images of the decaying way of life in the villages. They rejected romantic tradition. So they stuck to rural images, but they rejected romantic ideas. They were extremely realist. And these writers believed that the poetry shouldn't be like a puzzle with the symbols and images. So we know that modernist poetry, especially T.S. Eliot's poems, would be like puzzle with so many symbols and mythological or mythological references. But a movement poetry would be exactly the opposite. They want to use such a language, and also they want to use so much symbols and references. They experience the world as materialistic and evil. So according to them, the modern world is materialistic and evil. Less sentimental but more intellectual. So these poets, movement poets, are less sentimental, unlike the romantic poets, but they are more intellectual. They were primarily concerned with the values of their own cultural society. So they want to describe the condition of life taking place outside of their own place. They mostly concentrate on the problems faced by the common people in their own place. The movement poets used to believe in provincialism, and that gave very little importance to civilization of other ages and countries. So they concentrated on the themes of life, or what we can say for the kind of life led by people of their own place, rather than describing the lives of people from other countries or other places. So mostly their themes would be centering around the lives of people living in England. For the movement poets, the poet was an ordinary man, like the man next door, who is very common and lives in common place. So just like a friend, they would really share you their piece of poem. They were against the writing style of T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound. They were against the over-experimental nature of the modernist poetry. The movement produced two anthologies. This is very, very important. Remember the anthologies produced by movement poets. The first one was Poets of the 1950s, edited by D.J. Enright. It was published in 1955. And the second one was New Lines, titled New Lines, edited by Robert Conquest, published in 1956. The Angry Young Men movement occurred in 1956, which related to the decline of the movement. So after 1956, the Angry Young Men movement started, which led to the decline of the movement. The movement was succeeded in the 1960s by the group. So the group was another group of poets who came after movement poetry. Some movement poems include Church Going by Philip Larkin, Faith Healing by Philip Larkin, Bright November written by Kingsley Amis, A Frame of Mind written by Kingsley Amis, My Sad Captain written by Tom Gunn, The Laughing Hyena and Other Poems written by D.J. Enright. So remember some of the movement poems: Church Going, Philip Larkin; Faith Healing, Philip Larkin; Bright November, Kingsley Amis; A Frame of Mind by Kingsley Amis; My Sad Captain, Tom Gunn; The Laughing Hyena and Other Poems by D.J. Enright. That's all for today. In the next class, we will discuss the biography of the poet Philip Larkin.